CREVA stands for the Center for Research, Education, and Experiment in the Visual Arts. And we have actually teachers who help with those things, but we have never had someone who does research until our friend here, Aberdeen, came, and he is a very curious and mind wants to explore ideas, and it's just wonderful for CREVA, our research. And this is our first one, and we're very welcome. You're just very welcome, that's all. For all this Ready?
Yeah, tell us something about CREVA, a brief.
Well, I did.
That's it?
Yeah,
Any
it will
history?
teach. And the history is mostly teaching and having an open studio where we provide all your materials. Because of course, guests and a lot of people don't have materials. And a lot of people actually come with materials and don't want to take them home.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so we have a wide variety of materials. And so this is hopefully their books, a place where people can really explore this part of them that many, many, many of us have never explored. Using your body to express yourself. You're doing dance, and they do in theater, but also we do it in painting.
Thank you. Yay. I'm gonna start the projector again.
Yep. Okay. So, like Audrey said, CREVA is a center for research, and I actually came to CREVA to volunteer as a facilitator in the Open Studio. And as Audrey mentioned, Open Studio is a time when anybody can come and explore their creativity and expression through the visual mediums. So we have all the mediums ranging from graphite to charcoal to watercolors to acrylics to poster colors to oil pastels to oil paints, and we have different types of papers, and we have drawing boards, and we have a space where people can come and use these mediums to express their creativity. Anyways, thank you all for coming. Today we are exploring a topic called art forgery, and it is made up of two words, art and forgery. And the word forgery basically means to copy and to misrepresent. So it's not just copying, it's also misrepresenting it. So the first thing that I want to explore is the actual dictionary meaning of forgery, which says that creating and selling works of art which are falsely credited to other, usually more famous artists. Okay, this is basically what a forger is doing. He is not only copying the famous painting, he is also signing it by the name of the original artist, and he is selling it at the market value of that artist.
So if it was not sold, it wouldn't be called forgery?
Yeah, if it's not put out in the market to be sold, as it would just be a copy. Actually, it becomes a crime the moment you sign it with the original artist's signature. You should not do that. It's unethical, and it becomes a federal crime the moment you start earning money out of that. So that is what we are going to explore in my presentation, that how people actually did it, and we are going to explore one very specific case scenario, which I'll talk about in a minute.
If I did it for myself, just hang it up in my room?
Yeah. And that is a market. There's a market for that. That there are people who cannot afford to buy, say, a Mona Lisa. they can commission another artist to make a copy of that at a cheaper price, and it will be a Mona Lisa, but it will not be the Leonardo da Vinci Mona Lisa. So I can get somebody to make a copy of it and pay for it, but it won't be priced at the value of the original Mona Lisa. Yeah, so that's not a crime, because that artist is not claiming that it's a Leonardo da Vinci's painting. He's saying that I have recreated it and I'm presenting it as such. So the first part of it was that that you create and you credit it to the artist, and the second one is that art forgery can be extremely lucrative because you can make a lot of money out of it in the name of the original artist. But because of today's modern day technology, something called carbon dating and forensics, it is becoming more and more difficult to do that, because they can find out the authenticity of a painting on a molecular level. Okay, so going on to the next slide, I want to start by showing you an example of a painting which was for the longest time thought to be a Goya painting. Goya was an artist, and it was thought to be that he made this painting, and at a later stage, when forensic examination of the painting was done, it was found out that this painting is dated way before Goya was even alive, and it was actually done by an artist by the name Eugenio Lucas Velasquez. So because of forensics, the technology that they used, they actually found out that it was not, and Goya is a very well known artist and their styles are similar, so it was.
And it was not signed?
Yeah, there was no, I think it was just because of the style that people thought. There was not a point of time where Goya claimed that it was his, but it was just misrepresented by the people who found the painting. So it was corrected at one point of time. So this is a classical case of forgery. So sometimes it can happen because.
It's not forgery.
Yeah, no, it was just attributed to a wrong artist. It's just misrepresent. It's a case of misrepresentation. And then at some point, the reason I have this slide is to give emphasis on that misrepresentations can happen. There are various levels of misrepresentation. One can be that somebody claims it, and one can be that somebody misreads the painting to think that it is Goya's. But even Goya's paintings are pretty expensive. Anyways, moving on. There is a word called pastiche. It's a French word which translates to work of visual arts, literature, theatre, music, or architecture that imitates the style or character of the work of one or more other artists. Okay, I know this is a mouthful. I'll explain it and then it will be. So what happens is, in this case, let's say a current generation artist might take the artwork of maybe a previous or previous to previous generation artist and reassemble it to create a new story maybe out of it. Okay, so it's just reassembly. So the example that you're seeing here is that you're seeing that there are two ladies in a painting, whereas this is actually just a collection of two paintings being brought together, and probably a software like Photoshop was used to superimpose this lady onto that painting, and then some color correction was done to match the tone of the first painting to make it look like they both are in one painting. So this is also an example of copying. You know, you are, it's called in the field of media and entertainment, we call it a matte painting, where we take 2-3 scenes, we put them together. So we might take coconut trees, and we might take a beach, and we might take a boat, and we might take a mountain in the background, and we might recreate a beach kind of scenario where it was just sand and water, and now we have a scene where we have trees and mountains and people walking around and boats in the water. So that's a reconstruction of a scene by putting together different images. Okay, and this is also copying, because the matte painter is not creating those visuals, those elements in the scene. He's just reassembling them to make it look like a new scene.
So this is digital completely, not.
It can be done digitally also, optically also. So we can actually take photos of it, create negatives, superimpose them, create mattes, and then
Yeah, but this
expose
is
them.
not painted. This is not hand painted.
yeah, it's just recreation of artwork. So this is one of the examples through which it is actually copying. It is not legal. You are taking somebody else's work and putting it together again and claiming that it's
It's not legal.
yeah, it's not legal. You should not be doing this. No. Yeah. So what happens is, so this is why all the copyright laws are there. You know, like you can't go into Google and get all these images, put them together, and say that this is my photography. It's not legal. I mean, if the people who created the original artwork, they have a copyright on it, then they can actually sue you.
Abhijit, this is not pastiche though. What you're talking about
Yeah.
is or is not pastiche.
This is pastiche.
That is,
Yeah.
but all of this you're talking about is
Yeah.
putting different images
Yeah, it's an
together.
example of pastiche. So it's basically copying others' work. In short, it just means copying others' work, using it to create something else,
Hmm.
putting it together. Yeah.
Could be also a piece of art. You could
Yes.
make it very beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. So this is an example of two pieces of art which were put together, because it's not just that the person has taken a cutout and put it here. He has actually done color correction in this. If you closely look at this painting, the color doesn't match.
And the
So
sizes of the face.
Yeah, there's some amount of manipulation that has been done to put it together. Okay, so this is not a good thing to do.
I think it's creative. Why not? I mean,
Yeah.
Well, there are laws against it, so we'll have to talk to the lawmakers.
But you could do it if you didn't sell it and you just
Yes.
made it for yourself.
Absolutely, as long as you don't sell it, it's not a crime. You know, and you don't sign it by the original artist. It's not a crime. You can do anything with your time.
what if I sell it saying it's my
Yes.
signature and a
You can
copy and
take credit for putting it together.
inspired by
Yes,
whoever the
absolutely. If you give the reality, the fact is that if you tell the reality, you will not get the price. People do this to earn more money than they deserve. So that is the reason. That's where everything goes wrong. That when you do things to earn more money than the value of the art that you're creating, which is another topic for another day. I might do a research on that about how misrepresentation of art works in the art industry.
How about when they take Van Gogh, you know, and they put it all together and they make an animation out of it?
Yes.
They have those things on YouTube, you know,
Yes.
where you see the people.
There's a whole movie called Loving Vincent,
Oh, okay.
in which they took a bunch of his paintings and they animated a whole movie out of it. Yeah, at some point in time, I'm going to screen it at MMC. So we'll all see it, and I'll do film appreciation.
So then what they did though, they got the permission of the.
The Van Gogh Society or family or whoever, and they don't claim that this is Van Gogh's work. This is the work of the artist today. Yeah, and the most important thing here, with the word pastiche, comes that it celebrates rather than mocks. Yeah, so it's not trying to make a mockery out of it. It's trying to celebrate. You know, the artist's ambition is to bring things together to create something beautiful that he wants to express. Okay, so it's borderline between good and evil. Moving on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a case study here. There's a gallery in New York by the name Knoedler, and there was a huge forgery case, a Federal Bureau level case, where paintings worth up to $80 million was sold to collectors and other studios before they found out that they were all forgeries.
What artists were they forging?
I'll talk about that in a minute. Quite a few actually. So Knoedler Gallery was founded in New York. Something interesting about this image, I found this image on Wikipedia. This is a photograph of the Knoedler Gallery, but it is known as a stereographic photo. Does anybody know what is stereography?
It's like that.
Yes, it's exactly that. So these two photos are taken from two cameras which are placed at the distance at which our eyes are. So this is known as interocular distance. So the camera is first placed at this place and it takes a photo, and then it is moved to the same distance as the center of our two eyes, and another photo is taken, and it basically creates the effect of if you put your thumb like this and you look at it from one eye and then you look at it from the other eye, you get two images like that. And when you superimpose them and you see them through stereographic glasses, you can actually feel like you are in the room. You get the parallax. Does anybody know what is a parallax? Okay, parallax is the phenomenon which enables us to experience depth in perspective. 3D, yeah. So it's stereography. So just interesting tidbit. It's a bit technical, but they can basically recreate through a camera how we see the world. Because otherwise, when you're watching a movie, it's flat. But when you see it through stereography, you can actually feel the depth. Some objects feel closer, some objects feel further. So it's fooling your brain into. Stereography is another technology which is a lecture unto itself. So just I
That's
found
like
this
the 3D movies where you wear the glasses and
yes.
stuff.
So this
It was
actually,
kind of
this
like
is
at
most-
the turn of
the much
century,
older-
right?
sorry.
Like it was around 1900 or maybe 1880, people had that.
Yeah. No. This is a pretty new technology when it
But
comes
these,
to this red and blue, the red and blue
no, there was
glasses.
some
It
kind
was
of.
called a
switch.
Viewmaster.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Viewmaster, and they basically put it, so you had two, it was like binoculars,
Yeah.
and the negatives were placed in two things, so each one had this slightly
Yes. And
offset.
it would give, if you would
Right.
go up and down with it, you could feel like the object in front and back are moving. So that's the parallel. It's like how you, if you're going on a train and you look at the trees very far away, it seems like they're coming in front. That's the effect. That's the parallax effect. That things very far away seem like they are traveling with you, but eventually they go behind. it's a thing that our brain gets confused about. It's called the parallax effect. Anyways, so that's the thing about this image. So what happened is this gallery was opened in New York City, in the middle of Manhattan, in 1867 by the Knoedler family. And then it basically represented contemporary art. And around 1971, so yeah, that's the gallery. So initially they were mostly about contemporary art, but after it was purchased by one industrialist by the name Arnold Hammer, he wanted to move more towards abstract art. So till 1971, this gallery was mostly a very mainstream art gallery for contemporary art, for artists who were alive at that time. And eventually it went to the Hammer family, and they wanted to represent abstract artists, not contemporary artists. So they started representing, once Arnold Hammer acquired it, he started representing early abstract artist. This era of art is known as AbX. So abstract expressionism is the artwork that they wanted to represent. And one of the most influential artists of that time was Mark Rothko. That he was the front and center of this entire forgery case. So they actually put together exhibitions of Mark Rothko's paintings, along with other artists like, anybody?
Jackson Pollock.
Jackson Pollock.
I can't see who that is.
Okay, Robert Motherwell,
Oh, okay.
Mark Rothko, Willem de Kooning, another amazing abstract artist. Franz Klein, another abstract artist. And this is basically the studio that was set up in 1867. So this is how the studio was, and then this gentleman, Armand Hammer, brought the studio in 1971, and he moved it from contemporary art to abstract artist, whose photos and some of the work, and Mark Rothko specifically, whose works he started representing. Now what happened is, eventually through inheritance, it went to his grandson. This is Michael Hammer, and this is where things went wrong. So Michael Hammer inherited the gallery from his grandfather, and he appointed this fine lady. Her name is Anne Friedman, to curate all the artwork in the gallery. So he was a businessman, and he appointed her to take care of all the artwork in the gallery. And while she was doing, and she was very good, she had great connections, she was very good with people, she had very good reputation in the industry. She was very socialite kind of person. She used to hang out with art collectors and gallery owners, and she had a very good reputation in the industry because of her work. At one point of time, this lady comes up to her. Her name is Glafira Rosales. She comes up to her and she says that I have a bunch of abstract artist paintings, and I want to show it to you and exhibit it in your gallery and sell through your gallery. So Anne Friedman said, okay, bring them in. And literally she brought them in the trunk of her car. And she showed it to them, and Anne Friedman immediately fell in love with the paintings.
But were they her paintings?
No. So she's saying that I have these paintings.
Oh.
And she had a story behind it. Okay. Now, anytime any artwork of a very well-known artist is sold or represented, the studio wants to know the story behind how you got the painting. This thing is called the provenance. The word is provenance, which tells the ownership history of the painting. Okay. And she came in with a very wonderful story about this fine gentleman in Mexico who was living in Switzerland, and that's where he bought these paintings and brought them to Mexico with him, and now he has given it to this gentleman who is her boyfriend, and he is bringing these paintings to New York. So she gave a very convincing story which pretty much tracked the path of the artist who was. So Mark Rothko did these paintings when he was in Switzerland at the time. So she did some research about the history, and she found out that the story holds up.
It was all paintings by him.
Yes. So initially she started with Mark Rothko's paintings, and the story held up. And so that's her, who she comes to meet her, and she shows her, this is the painting that she showed her. So this is a Mark Rothko painting. Okay. And she told her all these stories, and she actually went in to bring in some experts to look at the paintings, and everybody said it's fantastic, it's an original, it's blah blah blah. Okay. It was approved. It not only it was approved, they displayed it, and they started auctioning it. So what you're seeing here is that the amount of people who turned up at the auction when they announced that they are auctioning a Mark Rothko painting. So this was done through one of the auctioneers whose name is Sotheby's.
Going back to your definition of forgery,
Yeah.
does it have to be a copy of a painting to be a forgery, or if I just say
Yeah.
I create a new painting
Yeah.
and I say this was done by
Yes.
Mark, that's also
That's what it is. In this case, that's what it is.
okay, but so that's not
Because
a forgery.
the original will be somewhere, and you can't claim that there are two paintings.
No,
which are the
there's
same.
no oh
Yeah.
this has no original.
No, they are saying that this is an original painting.
But do you think that she paid the people who came and said these are
We
original?
will come to that.
So-
There's a lot to explore here. We will come to that
So
point.
it's not a copy of an original painting, it's just a painting and he says
It's just a
like-
painting in the style.
Okay,
So
oh, I
it's
understand.
faking the style.
It's faking the style, yes.
Okay.
Because if it tries to copy it, there are Mark Rothko paintings in a studio. So you cannot say that I have a painting that is in that studio. So you'll be caught immediately. So you are faking the style, and then you are saying that it is another painting by that guy which nobody found. I had it. You know, so we are claiming that we in our basement we had one of Mark Rothko's paintings, and now we are bringing it out because we know that, you know, Mark Rothko's paintings have values. You know, so it's like that. So Sotheby's is one of the auctioneers, one of the greatest auctioneers, and they started auctioning these paintings. This is an example of a Motherwell, Robert Motherwell, one of the artists I showed you. This is an example of William de Kooning's abstract art. An example of Lee Kreshner.
Wait, these are the originals or you
No,
showing
these are the
ones they
paintings
sold?
that were sold through Sotheby's.
Okay.
Jackson Pollock. And these are the paintings which were sold in those auctions. You know, these are the paintings this lady one by one started
You
bringing in.
mean these are all forgeries?
These are all forgeries.
Oh.
And I'll show you a comparison a little later.
Oh my God.
So, not only were these sold to collectors, these were also sold to other studios. So, these studios bought those paintings and they started displaying them. So, this is an example of another studio displaying a Mark Rothko.
They put them in museums. And
Yeah, they put them in museums and other art galleries.
What year was this?
This is 2011. No, sorry, this ended in 2011. So, it went on for 10 years. So, in 2001 this thing started, and then it went on, the art forgery went on for 10 years before anybody realized that, oh, something is wrong.
Oh yeah.
We'll come to that when people realize that it's wrong.
Too much
Yeah.
to be true.
Yeah, so 10 years it went on. This is Mark Rothko. And one of the reasons that the story that was told, the provenance, one of the reasons the provenance was believable was because when these artists were making these paintings, they were not celebrated millionaires. They were very poor. They were struggling. Abstract art had no value. Everybody was trying to make Michelangelo's and Da Vinci's painting, you know, that style, the realistic paintings. Everybody was doing realistic paintings of the Renaissance masters. And when abstract art came into the market, it had no value. So they were not getting much money out of their artwork. So they were struggling, you know. This is an artist by the name Bernard Newman. These are the guys who started the revolution of abstract expressionism. Lee Kreshner, again Motherwell, William de Kooning. And initially these artists were just trying to, you know, express themselves separately. And at one point in time, they actually came together and made a group of abstract expression artists. And after they came together, you know, years and years after that, when they formed this union and created this, because it was not being recognized as art. You're just splashing some paint on a canvas and you're claiming it's art, you know, and nobody was paying attention to that. But then when these guys came together and they started explaining what is the expression in the abstract, is when slowly and steadily the artwork became more popular and people started seeing meaning in the chaos that they were viewing. Okay, so they eventually, all these artists eventually came together and formed a union. But till that time, they were literally exchanging their paintings for groceries. I mean, there's a documentation of Jackson Pollock actually giving a grocery store owner his painting in exchange for a packet of cigarettes. So they were in very bad shape. So when the stories were told, when the provenance was told that how did you acquire such an expensive painting, is because this guy went into that shop in which Jackson Pollock had given a painting in exchange for a packet of cigarettes, and he bought the painting over the shelf from the owner of the shop. So he could, anybody, like any common person could actually buy a Jackson Pollock over the shelf, you know, in some place where Jackson Pollock was at some time in some town in Europe, and you know, so the story is believable that any common person can actually acquire such prestigious paintings, because when they were making it, they had no value for it. And that's how the story went, that they got the paintings from Switzerland, brought them to Mexico, and now they are bringing it to New York. So the story upheld, and that's where they were able to believe it. And Anne Friedman brought in this fine gentleman, David Anfim, who was worldwide renowned as the foremost expert on Mark Rothko. Okay, he was appointed by the Rothko Foundation as the expert on Mark Rothko's artwork. And this fine gentleman claimed that the paintings were originals.
Were original?
Yes, he claimed that they were Mark Rothko's paintings. He actually wrote a book in which he wrote his ideas about Mark Rothko's, in which these fake paintings were listed. So that shows a lot about, you know.
But he did it on purpose, or he was
No,
told by it?
he bought it. Anne Friedman believed it.
He believed it.
He believed it. He told Anne Friedman that, you know, she called him in, come in, take a look at these paintings. And he believed it. And that's why because if he's an expert, he's a renowned expert, he cannot put his signature on say that, you know, look at a fake and say, it's his reputation. You know, so it was, the point that I'm trying to make is how good the paintings were.
Yeah.
The artist who made them made it to such a level that the person who's the world's #1 expert on Mark Rothko could not tell that it's not a Mark Rothko painting. Now, this good-looking fella is the boyfriend of Glafira Rosales, who bought the paintings from Mexico to New York. So Glafira Rosales was working in Long Island as a waitress in some coffee shop, and this guy brings in these paintings, and she basically changed her whole demeanor and approached. She started going to exhibitions. She started meeting Anne Friedman in exhibitions, and slowly, steadily, you know, started creating a reputation for herself, and then eventually, you know, through subliminal messaging, she put in the idea that she is an art dealer, and over a period of few years, she established herself as an art dealer, and then approached Anne Friedman with the paintings. This gentleman's name is Jose Carlos Bargantinos Diaz. This is where the things started going bad, because when people actually started realizing who her boyfriend is, this guy had a history of art theft. So then people started, okay, something questionable might be going on. But then what happens is, when there is so much money involved and you want to believe that something is true, you start overlooking minor details. You know, that's how the psychology works, that wow, a 15 million painting, but it might be a fake. No, it cannot be a fake. You know, you convince yourself that no, don't look at the hints, don't look at the negative signals. No, it's an original. You know, so this is what happened to a huge number of experts and people who are art dealers, that they overlooked these hints, but they were there. The signs were there that there is something wrong. And they found Anne Friedman at a time when she needed that success. She needed that, she was already very good, but she had become stagnated. She had reached a level and then she was not going anywhere. So she needed that boost. And this is what a con artist does. They find people who are at that stage in their lives where if something great can happen, they will jump to the opportunity. So they found Anne Friedman at that junction in her life. And there's a quote about a con artist, that a con artist is not a good speaker. a good con artist is a good listener. And that is what Glafira Rosales did. She became a vessel for Anne Friedman to talk. She would approach her and she would say a few things and then just let her rant away. And she really took to that somebody is listening to what I'm saying. And that's how she built her trust with Anne Friedman before she brought in the paintings. So she was a fantastic con artist when it came to, and she convinced Anne Friedman to overlook all the hints and buy the paintings. And after David Anfem, the paintings were also certified by the National Gallery of Arts, and they put their stamp on it saying that these are originals. So there are documents which said, I'm writing to you at the suggestion of Dana Cranmer regarding the 1958 work by Mark Rothko. Okay? And it put a conditional report which said that these are original paintings. They said that these are, the artwork is in very good stable condition. Okay? They put their stamp on it. These are remarkable paintings of Jackson Pollock. Okay? These applications, these letters were issued by the establishments which were representing art in America. And there are many of those. And then once they got all the confirmation, they started displaying the paintings and selling them, and all that sotheby business started happening. Yeah, there you go. So huge auctions, huge money, and at one point in time I'll show you the disparity between the cost at which they bought it and the cost at which they sold it. So one of the most important buyers of these paintings were this couple. They are the De Solis. So Domenico and Eleanor De Solis, they were very well established businessmen, business family in US, and they were they knew Anne Friedman, and they claimed that they were acquaintances when they met her, and they purchased the Rothkos from Anne Friedman. And so very well established, Time magazine, very, very highly regarded businessman, and they were the ones who approached Anne Friedman, and they recall their meeting with her that she showed us the Rothkos, and she called us into this fine office and served us drinks and whatnot. So this is the painting that they bought. Okay, Mark Rothko's in 1956. It was purchased by Knoedler's at $950,000 from Glafira Rosales, and it was sold to the De Solis at $8.3 million. Yeah, so that's how art dealing happens. That the art dealers or art studios purchase it at a certain price and they sell it with profit, but this is exorbitant. This is crazy. And these guys actually asked for this thing. They asked for certification, validation, and all. And she provided them with all the experts' names and letters and everything, that all the experts in the world have approved it. And then it was sold. So this is a sale letter of sale. And the provenance was so pretty much private collection, Mexico and Switzerland. So that was the story that was woven into it.
This confirmation that they are originals,
Yeah.
they were forgeries also, or they were?
No, they were by experts.
They were.
Yeah, experts
They were
looked
real
at
experts
yeah.
that did that. Okay.
Anne Friedman was running one of the biggest art galleries, so she didn't do anything without getting experts to look at it. The experts approved the paintings. Yeah, and we will come to the point how they found out. So all this happened, and they even, like I said, they not only did they sell to collectors, they also sold to other museums. So there's this Byler Museum in Switzerland which took some of the paintings, and they actually created a Mark Rothko's room, where the entire room was a huge gallery, huge room, and the room was called Rothko Room. all the paintings were from Knoedlers that they purchased, and they displayed them as a dedication to Mark Rothko. And this is the gentleman Ernst Byler, and he was good friends with the Desolles. So they actually asked him also that we are purchasing this painting from, this is the provenance and whatnot. And he's like, no, don't worry about it. I've got a whole room of paintings from Anne Friedman. Go ahead, buy it. It's an original. And he's like, this is the room with all the Mark Rothkos.
But if the paintings look, they fool everybody.
Yeah.
What difference does it make?
The difference that it makes is that Mark Rothko didn't make it. And that's the difference that it makes. That Mark Rothko never.
But they're so convincing, they
Yeah.
are just as he made them.
See, the problem is that the art industry is designed in such a way that the artwork is not important. It's the artist who is valued. So I could create a Mona Lisa and nobody would give me a penny for it. And just because I'm not Leonardo da Vinci, it's the name which is famous.
Yeah.
It's you don't call it a painting, you call it a Mark Rothko.
Right.
You call it a Rothko. You don't look at that painting and give it a name. You say it's a Jackson Pollock. That it's the name of the artist which has the value. Which
People
is
feel cheated when you pay like 8.3 million and then it's
Yeah.
not a lot.
that's coming. So what happens when they find out? So even Ernst Byler, told them that go ahead, buy those paintings. So Jackson Pollock's, so many different. So now I'm going to show you the artist who made those paintings.
Oh,
Yeah. So we come to find out. So eventually, it was people realized, and I'll get into how people realized. But the first thing that came out of that investigation was that who was the painter? Because the moment everybody knew that these are forgeries, who the hell did this?
Yeah.
Because it's not just Mark Rothko. He forged all those artists. So who is this fine gentleman who had the skill and the talent to learn and copy to such a level that he fooled the greatest experts in the world? And okay, so what happened is, at one point in time, they called in Mark Rothko's grandson to look at the painting. So he comes in, he looks at it, and he says, it's a beautiful painting, and he goes away.
In what?
And he goes away.
Okay.
He was not ready to comment on whether it's an original or not. He just said, it's a beautiful painting, and no more comments. So nobody knew whether that meant that he thought it was an original. He never said, these are my grandpa's paintings or not. He just came in and he said, so he was the surviving member of the Rothko family, and he said that it's a beautiful painting and no more comments. So it became a grounds for speculation. That, his grandson thinks it's a beautiful painting, so it must be an original.